All right, I have 6:01, so I think we could start and other
Yeah.
people show up as they do. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our public workshop on accessory dwelling units. Joining with me tonight will be Alex Lorca, our city attorney, who will be facilitating much of this meeting because of the legal background and laws that are involved in this complex situation. Also, Denise Duffy from Denise Duffy and Associates are one of our planning contract staff, and Joe Headley, the city's contract building inspector. The purpose of this workshop is to both provide information and to get feedback. We want to provide the community with information about what is going on with ADUs. That seems to be a question that we get a lot at City Hall in the last few months. And also to explain to you some of the powers that the city has and some of the powers that the city doesn't have with the implementation of all the new legislation that has happened in the last couple of years related to ADUs and housing elements. And it's a very complex situation, so I'm glad that we have the staff here to help us out. The idea for this workshop came up in February at the city's strategic planning meeting that we held, and it has been in progress since then. Part of probably the biggest issue that we're having this discussion is because housing is a priority in the state of California. Increasing amounts of legislation regarding housing, general plans, housing elements, and the housing shortage that we find ourselves in. Many of that, or much of that legislation has to do with accessory dwelling units, and we'll explain some of it tonight from a 30,000 foot level and give a little bit of detail. Right now, the city conforms to the state's accessory dwelling unit law. If there's not a municipal code in place, it means that we will abide by what the state law says when it comes to approving and overseeing accessory dwelling units in the city. Right now, as we're having this workshop, the city is currently working on developing its own accessory dwelling unit ordinance. Now, there are very limited things that we can do, but there are some things that we can do to make the transition to increasing numbers of ADUs in the city a little easier for residents and staff alike. The other issue that accessory dwelling units is tied closely to is the housing element in our city's general plan. And it is also closely tied to our regional housing needs assessment numbers. And it plays a part in helping the city meet its obligations under the regional housing needs assessment in providing affordable housing throughout our little town. So without further ado, I am going to turn this over to Alex Lorca, and he will start. There will be a PowerPoint presentation. What I would ask is if you have questions, please write them down. And then at the end of the meeting, or if we take a particular break where we identify where we can ask and answer some questions, if there's a particular topic, wait until we're done or wait until we open up questions. If you want to ask a question, if you know how to use your chat, go ahead and raise your hand. If not, kind of do this and raise your hand and we'll scroll through the screens and we will try and find you. If you do have questions or topics of discussion, we will put the timer on. We want to make sure that this is a short, concise presentation and that we get as much as possible out of this presentation. So Alex, thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Sure, thank you, Jeff. Good evening, everybody. It's nice to see so many familiar faces and some I don't recognize. As Jeff mentioned, my name is Alex Lorca. I'm the city attorney. Randy, would you put the slides up, please? Okay, and Randy, I apologize. It's not going to be as sort of efficient as it might be if we were in person. So Randy, if you'll just be on the arrow key for me when I say next slide. So if we could go into the next slide, As Jeff mentioned, the purpose of the workshop is to provide an update on ADUs and junior ADUs and JADUs, answer as many questions as we can from the public, and those that we can't, go off and research and provide those upon follow-up. And procedurally, the bigger picture here is, as I frequently do, I don't make the policy decisions. What I do is sort of say, here are the boundaries and here's some decisions you can make and here's some likely outcomes. And where you'll see that process play out is we will take public input from tonight as far as policy is concerned. Jeff will be, and Karen will be taking that stuff down. And then when we go to draft the ADU ordinance for Planning Commission review, we'll take your public comment into consideration when we do that. From the Planning Commission, they'll make a recommendation up to the City Council, and as with all ordinances, there'll be 2 readings on the ordinance. So really it's 4 touches, 4 public hearings, including tonight, with respect to getting input and sort of communicating the ADU ordinance. Next slide, Randy, please. Pretty self-evident. Accessory dwelling unit is accessory to the primary dwelling, whether it's single family or multifamily on a lot. A lot of people know them as casitas or granny units. This photo you see is from the HCD handbook on ADUs, which I have reviewed and plagiarized for this presentation. If you have specific questions, it's a great resource to look at. They've done a really fabulous job. Also, too, you can go straight to the statute. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, Randy, next one. So the ADUs come in 4 different flavors. There's detached ADUs. This would be sort of a detached garage that was converted. Attached to the primary structure, maybe a unit above a garage, converting existing space, master bedrooms that are separate, garages, maybe some other structure that was there on the same lot as the primary residence that's converted. And then the JADUs, which are a little bit different. That's really within a space of existing or proposed single family residence. And the big difference there is junior ADUs can share restroom facilities with the main dwelling unit and have efficiency kitchens. And efficiency kitchen is, you know, some people say hot, sort of, you think of a hot plate. So no propane or gas appliances, no 240 volt ovens, but anything essentially that you can plug in and have a hot plate, microwave, that type of stuff is allowed as a junior accessory dwelling unit. Next slide, Randy, please. As Jeff alluded to, sort of this is sort of a hot topic, especially before the coronavirus pandemic. Housing is just really at the top of the state's list as far as things are concerned. From the governor to legislator, it's, as you can see, this flurry of legislation in the past few years with respect to ADUs is meant to address the housing shortages, which we know are rampant throughout the state, and the state is getting serious now, with the idea being, you know, you have these, let's say you have a neighborhood, single family residences, all of a sudden each single family residence has the ability to become essentially a triplex, an ADU, the main residence, and a junior ADU. There's some uncertainty in my research and reviewing the statute and the HCD handbook. I think with a lot of new laws, HCD is generally a fantastic agency to work with. We work with them on our housing element, and they've got just a fabulous staff. That being said, there are some uncertainties as I read the legislation, but we'll do our best to get through those and ask questions of the state where there is uncertainty and go from there. A lot of these bills that you see came through have been codified in Government Code 65852.2, and that's a sort of main ADU provision in the Government Code. Randy, next slide, please. So here we have some dates, state and city key dates. Back in 2017, the state really got rolling on ADUs. The city through 2018 has worked on its housing element. Further legislation in October of 2019, the city has adopted its housing element in 2019. And with 2020 and 2021, we've seen a new, this is, when the bulk of these ADU laws have come into effect. Next slide, Randy, please. So there's a couple definitions, I think, at the outset that are really helpful. And the first is ministerial versus discretionary as far as approvals and what the city can and can't do. So the state law says that the ADU approvals are ministerially approved, sort of an over-the-counter permit, meaning the city receives an application for an ADU. Karen or whoever's in charge at the city essentially looks at it and checks boxes. Does it meet this, that, and the other thing? It's really sort of mathematical or nuts and bolts. The bottom line being that the city doesn't have discretion to help shape the project. So some people think of that sometimes as a building permit. You either meet code or you don't, although building permits in some cases can be considered discretionary. The flip side of the same coin is discretionary, and that the agency can shape the project. Things that go into a discretionary approval that don't go into a ministerial approval are things like, what are the privacy concerns? What are the aesthetics? What is the compatibility with the neighborhood? Those are all ways
Emmett,
in which
you do not get anybody.
Thank you.
Feel free to help yourself.
those are ways in which the city can shape projects. A conditional use permit's a classic one. Say who wants to put their store in there, and the city has the authority to shape that project, aesthetics, neighborhood compatibility, that type of thing. Next slide, please, Randy. The next sort of definitional or conceptual thing is preemption of law. We've got federal law, state law, and local law, and you see this in a lot of different type of things. Voting, there's federal voting law, there's state voting law, there's local voting law. Housing, you see that, and that's apropos to ADUs and housing. There's federal housing law, there's state housing law, and there's local law. I guess the big takeaway is right there in the middle, and that is with ADUs, state law they're serious. And so they have told local jurisdictions, we're going to give you some discretion over ADUs, but you've got to work within this framework that we've provided that we'll get into in a second here. And it's very heavily preempted. Normally planning and it is left to the local level under the theory that the local jurisdiction knows sort of what's best for its neighborhoods. But this is a situation which legislators said, we don't, no NIMBYs for us. We need you to open up the floodgates here for the ADUs. And so we'll get into, Randy, next slide, please. So with respect to where they are allowed in the city, in any residential or mixed use zone, so mixed use could be, residential / light industrial, something along those lines. The city can allow ADUs in other residential zones that, wherever there's housing, things like that. And if the city's going to not allow, the city's got to make specific findings as to why that is. And in the statute, it's, adequacy of water and sewer services, traffic impacts, and public safety. One issue that comes to mind we'll talk about in a little bit is the cease and desist order and maybe the moratorium on hookups, CalAM. So as you can see there, the state is saying, look, if there's a residential area and you don't want ADUs in there, you better give us a pretty good reason why. And they pretty much come down to health and safety things: water, sewer, traffic, and public safety. Next slide, please. So the city the state has said to the city, go ahead and make it as big or small as you want, and go ahead and do that within the parameters we've told you. So they say, you can have you can determine the minimum square footage, city, but it's got to be 800 square feet for a studio or one bedroom, or 1,000 square feet for more than one bedroom. Maximum square footage, the city has discretion there. If they don't choose to exercise that discretion, the default is 1,200 square feet for new detached ADU, or 50% of the floor area of the existing primary dwelling unit, but at least 800 square feet. And we'll get into that in a little bit. An interesting sort of side note from the legislation is the conversion of any existing accessory structure or a portion of existing primary residence is not subject to the size requirement. So that could be something bigger or smaller. You may ask yourself, what is the accessory structure? What does that mean? And that's defined as a structure that is accessory or incidental to a dwelling located on the same lot. I mean, to my mind, if you can get the building permits for a garden shed, I suppose that could be an accessory structure. Again, the state's going heavy on this and is really trying to remove as many obstacles as they can from approval. Next slide, Randy, please. So the topic that Jeff and I have talked about and have been concerned of some of the residents are the design standards. For ADUs, there's a distinction to be made between, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, there's sort of, the state law is broken down into two areas. One is a very specific type of ADU that the state has said you basically can't touch unless there's a health and safety thing. And then there's ADUs where the state has said you can have some criteria around it. Again, it's got to be objective like we talked about, so it can be ministerially approved. But so for the ones that we can exercise a little discretion, however, and make it very clear, check the box, is parking, height, setback, landscape, architectural review. You may say, well, how's architectural review ministerial? To my mind, that basically means colors and style to match the existing structure. Again, the second bullet here is it's got to be substantially objective to let Karen or the building official go down and check the box as far as does it or does it not meet. So these won't be going to the planning commission unless they don't meet these objective criteria. Then there is an opportunity for the applicant to go through the discretionary process. But basically the state has said, we want you to have this sort of this tunnel that they can go through without all the discretionary concerns. And if they can do that within the parameters of that city, you've got to just process these and approve these. Next slide, Randy, please. The state has also told us that because an ADU is deemed an accessory use, they're not going to count. The city is prohibited from counting the square footage of ADUs for density purposes. Setbacks is another big issue, of course. So obviously, if it's an existing living area, that it's already there, so it's not going to be subject to a setback. Or if it's an ADU is built in the same location as an existing structure, it's allowed to go back where that structure was. Otherwise, they're giving us a maximum of 4 feet from the side and rear property lines. So to the extent city has, as we talked about last night at Planning Commission, a certain percentage for the depth of a lot, or to a maximum of 20 feet. This now you're looking at 4 feet as sort of being the maximum setback. So again, it's the state coming in and saying, that's all very well and good that you've got your local regulation, but we're going to preempt that, for ADUs. Next slide, Randy. Parking is another issue that Jeff and Denise and I talked about a couple days ago. Probably a little bit more detail than you want, but because the residents have asked a lot of questions, I decided just to put a lot of information in here. City doesn't have to require a parking space for an ADU. So in other words, if you submit an application for an ADU, previously the city could say, well, that's fine, but you've got to have a parking space for this ADU, which can be difficult. So the city, again, preemption, the state has said you can't require more than 1 parking space per unit or bedroom, whatever's less. And by the way, tandem parking counts. So if you have one driveway and the garage is not available, so the second car parked behind the first car, that now is a parking space sufficient for an ADU. And the state went farther and prohibited parking that requirements in a couple circumstances. Randy, if you could flip the slide to that next one, please. And here are the circumstances in which the city, again, is preempted from imposing a parking standard of 1 parking space per unit. And that is where the ADU is located within 1/2 mile walking distance of public transit. And public transit is also defined as a location, bus stop, train station, where a public may access buses, trains, subways, and other forms of transportation that charge set fares, run on fixed routes, and are available to the public. So of course, MST comes to mind on that one. Can impose where there's a historical district. To my mind, my knowledge, the city doesn't have that. where the ADU is part of a proposed or existing primary residence or an accessory structure. So that means it's already existing and already there. When on-street parking permits are required but none are offered, that would be something like San Francisco or big cities that require parking permits and only dole out a certain amount. And again, we've got preemption here. Or where there's a car share vehicle located within 1 block of the ADU. I looked around for a little bit more on that. That to my mind is sort of a ride share thing. Car share vehicle, to my mind, can be, I don't know, Uber or Lyft as well, but that's one of those areas where we'll have to press HCD for a little more information. Next slide, Randy. In the past, cities have required the owner of the property to either reside in the main unit or in the ADU. Some have done that for R1 districts only. Again, preemption here says at least until January 1 of 2025, that's prohibited. You can't require that. So you could have an ADU in a primary residence, and now the city can't require the owner to be in one of the two. There is a provision in there that says if you have a ADU and a JADU, the owner's got to occupy one of either the primary residence or the junior accessory dwelling unit. So again, the state coming in here and going as far as telling cities, who cannot be required to occupy property. Next slide, Randy, please. STRs, not a controversial topic at all. It is, definitely in speaking with Jeff, he said, Alex, do a slide on STRs because it's a hot button issue. So the local agency does have the ability to require them to be rented for 30 days or more. And when you think about that, that makes sense because the point of the legislation is housing for people, not short-term rentals for people. We'll see in a little bit, I mentioned the 2 flavors of the state law. For the specific ones that are enumerated, we'll talk in a second. It's prohibited to rent them for short-term purposes. Right now, the city allows short-term rentals. And so you may say to yourself, well, what if they build a short-term rental, an ADU, or they are or not doing that? If the Planning Commission recommends to the council and the council agrees that all ADUs shall not be used for short-term rentals, what would happen in that case to the existing short-term rentals that were for ADUs is the short-term rentals are issued on a yearly timestamp and reissued on a yearly timestamp. So the owner of that probably would have the right to use it as such, but as soon as that prohibition on rental of ADUs for short-term purposes, when they went to renew that, it would be prohibited from renting. They'd be prohibited, from renting the ADUs on a short-term rental basis. Again, that's a great example of where my job is to outline the law and what we can and can't do. And then your policymakers, planning commissioners, and city council members will exercise their discretion and say, based on our input, and here's the, I give them the playing field and what they want to do in there, based on community input, they can do. So that's another sort of important issue of ADUs. Randy, next slide, please. So this is the second variety. To this point, we've been talking mostly about ADUs where there's some discretion within a framework that the state has provided. This you can think of as a constriction even further. This subdivision E of the ADU ordinance basically says the city has to ministerially approve a building permit in 4 circumstances. And this is, again, is the state saying, don't gum up the works with your local issues. 1 ADU and 1 junior ADU with an existing single-family residence with exterior access setbacks must satisfy fire and safety requirements. So the 4 foot minimum or maximum from the previous variety now is just fire and safety. To my mind, that basically means can you walk in and out of there? And I don't know if Joe Headley's on, but he may be able to speak to that a little bit as well too. And the junior accessory dwelling unit's got square footage maximums that have to be met. So again, number 1 is if you meet these criteria, the city can't even impose the design, as I read the legislation, designer or landscaping or other type of even though they have to be objective and laid out well, the city has some discretion to craft that. To my mind, the city cannot impose those on these. The second one is the detached new construction that doesn't exceed the 4-foot side and rear setbacks. And the city can require a limit of 800 square feet and a height limit of 16 feet. So that's a new standalone ADU, the first one having been the existing. Randy, next slide, please. So now we're talking about multifamily dwellings, apartment complexes, condos, things like that. Again, building permit approval, if there is a garage, attic, basement, one of the things I looked at, a crawl space, if it's there, the city's got to allow at least one ADU per that multifamily dwelling, and up to 25% of the multifamily dwelling units. And so, again, if there is apartment or condo or something, and they can get a building permit, it really doesn't matter what the space is. The fourth one is up to 2 ADUs located on a lot that has an existing multifamily dwelling, but are detached from the multifamily dwelling. So this would be the main apartment complex, and there's a couple, there's two other structures or whatever they may be. So they have to be within the 3 is within the multifamily, and number 4 is the ADUs located outside of that. So again, subdivision E is very limiting as far as the city's discretion. Next slide, Randy, please. Short-term rental of ADUs and JADUs approved under subdivision E is prohibited. Again, with respect to the first variety, the city has the ability to say you can't short-term rent them, but the ones that are approved pursuant to a building permit under subdivision E, they cannot be rented for short-term rentals. And again, as I mentioned, some of the design standards don't appear to apply to the ADUs and JADUs approved under subdivision E. Randy, next slide, please. So, as Jeff mentioned, this is these ADUs count towards arena numbers. So, if you've got questions on that, we can go into that a little bit more. But that's a huge thing. That's basically saying that the city can use ADUs count towards meeting our regional housing needs allocation. Another interesting tidbit is that HOAs can't prohibit or substantially interfere with ADUs, even if the CC&Rs prohibit. So again, state coming in and saying Davis-Sterling Act and all these common interest development acts, I'm sorry, even if you've got this beautiful subdivision and it's been, one house per lot forever, can't prohibit. The HCD, Department of Housing and Community Development, will review our ordinance after it's adopted. And certainly we will seek their blessing before we go through the adoption. So again, the state's watching this very closely, and HCD in effect has veto power if they feel we don't comply with the ADU regulations. And in a way, that's a good thing. In a way, once we have their stamp of approval, we know we're sort of platinum plated with our ordinance. Next slide, please. Again, state emphasis on what we're doing here, a categorical exemption from CEQA from the adoption of a ADU ordinance, which is those of you that follow CEQA and land use matters is huge, because otherwise environmental impact reports and studies and that kind of thing could really slow down or make very expensive ADU ordinances. So we get a pass on that one. But under all circumstances, the ADUs must comply with the building code. And if there's building code questions, I think Joe might be on, Joe Headley. Next slide, Randy, please. So what's our process? Sort of like a building permit. Karen will take the permit in and go over whether or not it meets the objective criteria. Water, we'll talk about in a second, but you've got to have the water in order to do this. And I think the legislation acknowledges that where there's water, sewer shortages, as we have the bullet point here, it's treated like all other additions and remodels. And again, approved ministerially. So setbacks, design standards, colors, materials, And we can't have it subject to a hearing if they meet the criteria. So that's the sort of city process. Think along the lines of addition, building permit, over the counter. Next slide, Randy, please. Water, water, water. So in consulting with the Water Management District, well, there's no per se prohibition on using water for your ADUs if you're going to buy it. If you're going to have a new construction ADU, they want a sub-meter on it just to keep better tabs. But it doesn't mean that any allocation's been freed up for ADUs. So my understanding from the Water Management District is the way that you can take water from your main residence and pipe it into a standalone ADU or unit or garage you're going to convert is to convert some of your high flow water fixtures and bank some of those credits and then use those for ADU purposes, which is good news. That that means it's without the water, none of this is possible. Final slide, Randy. I apologize if I'm sort of rushing through this. The next step is, of course, to receive your input tonight, answer questions as best we can, work with the planning staff to take an ordinance to the Planning Commission, and then the Planning Commission's job is either to recommend or not recommend to the City Council. And from there, as I mentioned, first and second reading of an ADU ordinance. So again, four bites at the apple here. And if there's questions, Jeff, if you can help me sort of identify them, I will be scribbling notes furiously for those that I can't answer off the top of my head. But Jeff, if you would facilitate the question type thing,
Absolutely.
I'd appreciate it.
Go to full screen and remove the presentation.
Super.
So if you have a question, again, either if you know how to use your hand raising button, we get the little hand emoji, or go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll see if we can locate you.
I think Ethan's dog just had his hand up.
Well, I do see I see Mike Hayworth first. So Mike, let's go to you.
Yeah, Alex, you're saying that the maximum setback is 4 feet, so that you could essentially build the house right up against the property line?
You could build the ADU up to it, yeah.
Wow, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
Will the chat be enabled?
No, we're asking people to ask their questions and we're taking notes. The chat is disabled.
May I please ask a question? This is Brian Bowles.
Of course. Go ahead.
When it comes to water, you were saying that a sub-meter is required by Monterey Water Management. Is that correct?
My understanding is where there's a new standalone ADU unit, yes.
Understood. Okay. And then my second question and last, just some clarification around square footage. I've heard 800, I've heard 850. On these slides, it kind of said both. It also said 1200. For a detached ADU unit, are you please able to clarify the square footage minimum, maximum requirements, please?
Sure. So the state has said you can require a maximum size, but that maximum size cannot be more than 850 square feet. I think it is for studio and one bedroom, and 1200 for more than 200. Pardon me, for 2 or more bedrooms. The 800 square feet. I have to go back through my slides. Give me 1 second here.
And one thing I'll say is we'll try and make this slide presentation available on the website.
It will be, yeah.
And you'll be able to refer to it or come on down to City Hall or call us and we'll get you a copy.
Thank you.
Alex, Joe Headley might be able to answer that.
Okay, Joe, are you on?
Yeah, I think the state needs to provide us with a little more clarity on how they phrased the minimum and maximum on the 800. It does lead to some confusion. I think we just require some clarity from the state on that. Thanks,
Joe. I'm going to go to Kim Shirley, and before Kim asks her question, if if we don't happen to see your hand, or you don't have video and you don't know how to use the hand emoji, if nobody's talking, feel free to jump in and ask if you can ask a question, but we'll try and go to hands first. Go ahead, Kim.
Thanks, Jeff. This question is actually maybe for you, acting city manager. Do you know if we have any water credits available? I know as a city, I know that Seaside has made water credits available for their residents. I'm wondering with our wells that we have within our city, if we have any water that's available for our residents.
That's a great question. In May, we're going to be doing a presentation on our water resources. I don't know exactly right now. I would reach out to Denise if she knows anything about that and all her work with planning.
I don't think under the current water management district allocation system for water credits that the city has any remaining. We'd have to double check that. What water management district has done is said that they're going to be providing water credits within a certain, we requested, and they said we will try. They'll request a State Water Resources Control Board to allow them under the current cease and desist order, the CDO, to provide. They said up to 2 for Delray Oaks. We requested 4. They said yes, up to 4 for affordable housing, quote unquote. At this point, as you may have read from the City of Monterey, State Water Resources Control Board may or may not approve that, and so it's really not a guarantee. So I think what's important to recognize from Alex's presentation and Jeff is that if you have if you want to go after and want to go and get an application in for a building permit for an ADU, please first check whether you have the amount of water fixtures that you need for the allowable use that you want. So whether it's 1,000 feet, 800 feet, whatever, make sure you have enough. You need to basically be able to say, I'm converting these number of fixtures to allow for this ADU in this location. And Water Management District, then we would be happy to help through that process. But essentially, what's the real constraint in the City of Delray Oaks for development of more ADUs is whether or not you have the water. And the way that the Water Management District does it, which is how Karen explained the process, is go for a building permit, make sure you have the water from Water Management District. Is they'll go through and they'll count the number of bathrooms, as we all mostly know, and fixture counts, and then pre-project and post-project. And that's really going to be the limiting factor, which is really important for people before they go through a lot of design planning, et cetera, to understand if that's allowed.
Thank you, Denise. And then Alex, I just have a clarifying question again. So for currently, the ordinance says that the city can say that ADUs cannot be used for STR. So that's not a blanket statement for them. That's something that the city can decide to impose?
I think I understood your question, Councilmember Shirley. So the city has the discretion to say, of the 2 varieties, one is prohibited from being STRs of that subsection E type, those 4. The city does have the discretion with all other ADUs to say, thou shalt not use them for short-term rentals.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure. Yeah, I just want to make sure that we do have that discretion to do that. Okay.
That's right.
All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Mayor Kerr, I see your hand. You're muted, Mayor.
Sorry about that. So I am curious, our city isn't that big. Has anyone taken a look at the public transit schedules to see, or locations? I am guessing that nowhere in the city is not within a half a mile of a public transit.
Nobody's looked at that, specifically yet, Mayor. I'm sure that's something we can get on the maps and mark out. I would be surprised as well. There are numerous stops all along CDR, which dissects the city almost right down the middle.
Right. So that would mean we couldn't have parking limits, how I understand it.
That's
And
right.
the last thing is, I was just looking over these today, so I just thought I'd mention it. There is current legislation that would actually eliminate the rear property line, but the sides would be there. So there's still a lot of movement on this. But that was all I had. Thank you very much for the presentation.
My pleasure. And that's a great point, Mary, and sort of the fluid nature of it, that, you know, we had all that legislation come in and it continues to come.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Mayor. Thank you, Alex. Michael Berger.
Thank you for the presentation. Very, very informative. I do have a question going back to water. When we did our addition, we had recently purchased our homes. They waived the survey for water credits. So that means someone coming to your house and doing a survey. Are they going to waive surveys for people applying? Are they going to go on their word, or is that, how does that going to work?
I should probably defer this question to the Water Management District, but from my understanding, if your house is on file, they know what you have in your home. If it's not, for instance, when houses change hands, now they do send people out to your home. So I don't know the specific answer to that, but if they do have your house on file, they know what you do and don't have, and then they would do the calculations and say, okay, you got rid of your low efficiency washer, your low efficiency toilet, and you're going to make enough now to put in the ADU. If your house is not on file with the district, my understanding is, for instance, when I bought my house, we had someone come out and look around and count fixtures. So I guess it's sort of unique, Planning Commissioner Berger, that they did that for you. But I see Denise's hand. Maybe she's got a thought on that.
I think that's correct. When you have a title change, I think there's the nuances in other jurisdictions. It's when you have a permit that is being issued, they normally do try and go out and confirm pre and post project, and that really helps the city, and it helps the property owner to understand that yes, you do or do not are able to comply with that. So, and Joe may know more about that, but when we do the update to the ordinance, maybe something, I think what's unique about, again, this jurisdiction and our peninsula cities in terms of the ADU ordinances is the Water Management District and the constraint that we have, the real constraint that we have on water. So therefore, when Alex has already been looking at different types of ordinances and what's going to go in those, there will have to be something regarding the process and constraint on water under this city and the CDO.
I can clarify a bit to the specificity, there you go, of the transfer of the property. Water Management has waived their inspection, but what they've done is made the applicant the obligatory to certify that it matches the previous sale, that there's been no augmentation to their system. When there's a building permit, the first question is asked, does this match what is on record? So yeah, they've done a little trust out to the public with it, that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
All right, looking around for more hands. Mr. Fitzsimmons.
Am I unmuted? Make sure I'm not muted.
Mr. Fitzsimmons,
I can't hear.
you may be muted. No.
No, he's not muted.
Yeah, your microphone may not be working if you know how to check your settings on your microphone and make sure it's correctly on. Or what we could do is briefly turn on the chat if you want to go to the chat and send us the question really quick.
How's that?
Better.
Oh,
I took the earbuds out, unfortunately. So my question is just technically hypothetical, but if the rear property line happened to be adjacent to or butting up against the PG&E right away in Plumas, what access via that right of way to property would anybody want to plan on, or just be aware of what restrictions there might be?
Yeah, I suppose if PG had some sort of easement, again, the ingress and egress has to be signed off on. And so if that was something that was prohibited by PG&E operations out there, I don't think that would fly. Also too, I think as far as property rights are concerned, if there's an easement there or something, then, as between the two civil parties, the easement holder and the beneficiary of the easement, the dominant and the subservient tenements, that might be an issue as well. I apologize, Mr. Pistons. I'm not sure I fully understand your question. Can you reframe it?
Well, in the non-hypothetical, so my rear property line is backs up to the PG&E easement and Plumas. And this particular piece of property, there's 2 gates on the rear, and a concrete parking pad that's back there. And other people, obviously, the properties up and down that particular easement have RVs and God knows what access parking back there. So that was the reason for my question, just whether that's something that could be planned for. But I understand the answer, and the answer to that is no.
I think, but if you wanted to contact me offline, maybe we could get in a little more detail. I hate to have you walk away thinking no, when I just want to make sure I answer the question.
Well, I'm sure PG&E doesn't want me doing anything onto their property. I'm sure there's all kinds of liability that they would.
Right. Do they want a tenant, crossing their easement where there's not a right to, that type of thing?
Which I understand. So thanks.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzsimmons. Thanks, Alex. Looking around for more hands.
See Kim Shirley.
Go ahead, Kim.
All right, I don't want to hog it if other people have questions, but I think we have an ordinance or Muni code that says that we have to have a garage. I'm assuming that is now going to be changed so that you can turn your garage into an ADU and we're not going to be required to have a garage.
I think that's right. I think the garage would be either part of the primary structure or it would be considered an accessory structure, which they have said can be used for ADU purposes as long as the building permit can be obtained.
Okay. And then I was wondering if we have put any thought into if residents already have ADUs on their property, are we going to go back and make them official ADUs for the city, or how do we deal with those that already have ADUs?
If they've been properly permitted, then I don't think they're subject to the new regulation. They may at some point become legal non-conforming, but if they are properly permitted and funds were expended and relied on by the permits granted by the city, I think those stay as is.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Mr. Bowles, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I'm just kind of curious, generally, how many ADU permits have been applied in the city so far, and how many have passed? How many have been declined?
Karen, do we just have the one so far?
Joe, are we at 1, correct, right now? Or 2?
So as of yesterday, we are 2.
2, yeah, that's right.
And actually, probably by Monday, we will be 3.
Okay.
Wow.
Thank you very much.
They're doubling at a fast pace. Mr. McCullough.
Yeah, so longer talk about setbacks. I take it's all talk about being in the back of the backyard or back of the home. We're talking about 4 feet setbacks. Is there any restriction in front of the home?
So in front of the home, I think in most circumstances, and I'd have to go back and look, but I believe those can remain per code.
Okay.
So the state preemption happens for side and rear setbacks as I read the legislation.
Okay, I just had one other question, and it's of course it's on everybody's mind about water credits, and what I understand what everybody's talking about The city of Delray Oaks does not have a water allegation that you can buy from. You're going to have to kind of do the water count that's existing in your own home to be able to create an ADU unit.
Yes, that is the process currently, unless something changes.
And Mr. McCullough, with respect to the front setback, I'm just looking at my notes here. So the 4 that are specified in subsection E, local agencies may impose, pardon me, okay, front yard setbacks cannot preclude a statewide exemption ADU. So one of those 4 that we talked about can't prohibit the ADU, and otherwise must not, quote, unduly constrain the creation of all types of ADUs. So nice and fluffy language there for us to rank with going forward. But so to my mind, it's per code, and then the 4 that are allowed per subsection E, the front setback can't preclude construction of it, and all otherwise you can't sort of unduly constrain.
So I could build an ADU unit in front of the home.
It would appear so.
Okay, I was curious about that. All right, well, thank you.
My pleasure.
And just for staff and Denise and everyone as we work through this, perhaps the city, what comes to mind, what the city can do is when we have our ADU application process is perhaps put together a checklist and some notifications and things to remember so that when you do apply, such as, hey, check with the water district first. These are some of the requirements to make it a little bit easier for getting an understanding on it when you go through the process. So we'll keep that in mind. Mr. McCullough, is your hand raised again? Oh, looks like not. I'm looking around. If anybody, if you raise your hand, please keep it up for a minute so I can see, because I've got to switch through some screens. I'm not seeing any. One thing I will do is if you
Jeff,
go ahead.
Councilmember Shirley had her hand up.
Oh, there it is.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I thought it was one of the cars in the background. I got
funny. Alex, for a detached ADU, does it still follow the same guidelines for new buildings in that it would require to be solar on top?
New buildings,
obviously.
Solar on top. If that was a requirement of the building code, I believe that would apply. But that's a good question, and that's one that I can give you. My sense is XYZ, but I really need to follow up to give you the definitive answer.
Okay. Yeah, I'd really like to look at other ordinances around us, because I believe like for Seaside, they're going, all electric with their ADUs. And so, really focusing on green building, extra insulation. So, I would be really interested in going in that direction for some of the requirements for our ADUs.
So we have been collecting, oh, sorry, Alex.
Oh, no, Denise, go right ahead, sorry.
That's been part of the process for the last 4 or 5 months of collecting all the neighboring ordinances, as well as other exemplary ordinances, sharing them with Alex, and that'll be part of the process as we move forward. But that's a really good, helpful thought.
Yeah, Councilmember, sure, that's a fabulous point. It's exactly what we were hoping to get out of tonight is to then include that in the package that goes to Planning Commission.
Great, thanks.
Sure.
Mr. McCullough.
Yeah, matter of fact, what Shirley was mentioning, I do have a relative that's down south that mentioned about ADUs were supposed to be required to have solar panels. So I don't know if that's going to be part of city Delray Oaks requirements, which you guys just touched on.
Yeah.
Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, in terms of the solar panels, currently the Green Building State Ordinance requires that new developments, and they use that term broadly in developments. So we're modifying an existing development So those would not be applicable. So with the intent of the state ordinance being less hurdles to create a new residence, if you were to add that particular physicality to part of the structure, that, as Alex mentioned, would have to go through our ordinance approval through the state. I have not seen any pushback either way about that specific, because no one's asked about that, but I currently cannot require that as part of the building review because it's an existing development that we're already dealing with. That solar requirement is for specifically new developments. Thanks.
Joe, even if it's for a detached ADU, is that still considered part of the original?
Correct. So when you read into the AD ordinance, they're considering this accessory to the existing development. And so in my reading of it, obviously Alex maybe could clarify that even more than me, but they were pretty specific that was part of the existing structure. And when you get into burdening, as the term is used, to an existing structure, you got to be fairly careful. And I don't have the authority currently to do that as my reading is.
Yeah, I would concur. I mean, I think there's a distinction between existing and new construction. And I just don't know the 1000% answer on new construction, but we'll chase that down.
Thanks, Alex. Mr. Bowles?
Yes, just one quick question. I don't know if it was mentioned, I apologize if I looked over it, but in regards to the permitting process, it is 60 days the city must reply. Is that correct?
Must approve, otherwise by operation of law it's deemed approved.
Could you clarify that, please?
I'm sorry, I'm speaking like everyone. Yeah. So there's 60 days to approve the ADU application. And if the city doesn't act within that time, the law says it's approved. So it's really, you know, it's a carrot and the stick there is to, you know, take away a lot of the discretion, and hopefully it should be a quick thing. But if not, then the state's going to deem it approved.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Go ahead, Joe.
Sorry, had not realized I raised my hand. I'm technically malfunctioning, sorry.
No worries. Mike?
So we have as part of our ordinance, the lot coverage requirements. So how does this fit in with that? Does this still fit? The ordinance talks about other buildings on the property and be taken into the lot coverage calculation.
Good question. And I think, again, lot coverage is preempted here.
Thank you, Alex. Whoops. Bring back and look for some more hands. I will offer, if you don't have a camera and you are not using your emoji hand, if you want to just unmute yourself to ask a question, I'll give that opportunity now because I don't see any other hands, but I want to make sure that folks who can't raise their hands have a chance to ask questions if they have them. All right, I am seeing none. Karen, are you seeing any?
I don't see anybody.
Okay.
Well, I just have
Shirley.
one
Okay.
quick question. Okay, ADUs that go over the garage, is there a height maximum?
I think what did I say, 16 foot?
16 foot.
Was it
16 foot,
16 feet?
okay.
Yeah,
Height is 16 feet.
height of 16 feet.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's mentioned twice.
Okay,
Which is good that it clarifies that.
okay, good, thanks.
Yeah, I just got one clarification on that 60 days to get an ADU unit approved. And it says for the city to respond. So if the city responds within 60 days, but still had a question, does that mean it's going to prolong past 60 days? Or does the city have 60 days to approve it or not?
I think it's 60 days to approve. And I think there's,
Approve.
yeah, to approve. There was one exception to that that I came across in my research. I can't put my finger on it right now. But I think the general rule is 60 days to approve.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, it was something along the lines of well, I won't say because I don't remember specifically.
No, that's kind of what I
General
read.
rule being 60 days to approve.
Yeah, that's kind of what I read into it. That it was up to 60 days for the city to find out if it's going to be approved or not. But it's almost sounded like if you be able to fit all the parameters, guidelines, in 60 days, you're going to have your ADU unit approved.
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you.
And I see Joe has his hand up.
Go ahead, Joe.
Joe Headley, are you there?
Sorry, another technical difficulty. Sorry, I'm in a hotel room. Things are a little different. When you look at the response time, when you're talking about a building application, because this is strictly a building permit application, I read this as a total response time that the city has. So if I receive an application and I respond in 6 days, it is now outside the city's jurisdiction of how much time we have. So the city's clock stopped at 6 days. If that applicant wishes to take another 6 weeks for that, it's no longer within the city's control. So therefore, if they have a really flawed application and they think they can wait 60 days and I will automatically approve it, that is not the intent of that 60-day restriction. What it's doing is for impacted building departments to make sure that these receive top priority of review. So 60 days is a very reasonable amount of time for any jurisdiction to review it, even if there's 2, 3, and 4 reviews of a project. The advantage we have in this city, it's small. I'm the entire building department. We've had several of these. I think the longest one that was responded to because we were talking with water was 6 days of city. So I don't think that 60-day calendar, at least for our jurisdiction, is something that we have to worry about, at least for the foreseeable future. But that's the intent. The time that the city have control of the calendar, not that the applicant can take those corrections back, wait 60 days and say, I got it. That's not what's going to happen.
And I would agree, because you could have an applicant come in and not have figured out the water situation, for example, not have completed the design plans well, and they're just coming in with an application. It's not complete at all. So you want to make sure you have that time period to be able to do the back and forth.
Thanks, Denise. Thank you, Joe. Mr. Ragsdale Cronin.
Yeah, just Alex, if you don't mind, could you look into the 16-foot height?
Sure.
Because I can't imagine how you could build on top of a garage and keep it 16 feet. A floor of a house is 8 feet high. 2 floors would be 16 feet. You'd have no anything for a roof. So just if that could be clarified, because I thought I saw somewhere on an ADU where the height requirement where you go on top of a garage is different. I can totally understand it 16 foot for a standalone dwelling, because you probably don't want a 2-story ADU at that point. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Bill. And looking around, I don't see any raised hands. I'll give one more opportunity for those of you that can't raise your hands to unmute and ask a question if you need. All right, I see none. Karen, can you just confirm that?
Yep.
Great.
Don't either.
First of all, I'd like to thank Alex and Denise and Joe for their time tonight, and Karen and Randy for taking notes and doing tech, and everyone else who attended with the questions. This is the first of, as Alex said, 4 bites of the apple. We'll be going to the Planning Commission with the ordinance that we work on for public comment there. Then it goes to council for 2 more bites at the apple before it takes effect or gets approved. In the meantime, we'll be looking at the notes and the questions and the concerns, and we'll be trying to answer all of them and clarify those things. And we'll also start working on our city's guidelines to ADUs that we will hopefully be able to hand out and assist folks who are looking at engaging in this process. In the meantime, feel free to call City Hall, call me, call Karen. if you have further questions, we'll try and answer them as quickly as possible. And again, thank you very much. And I hope you have a good evening and everybody stays safe and well.
Thank
Good night,
you.
all.
Thank
Take care.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Everyone.
Bye.